The rain battered the old cabin with a relentless rhythm, the kind of storm that seemed determined to wash the world away. Inside, Clara sat hunched near the fire, the flickering flames painting her in shades of gold and shadow. The warmth was a fragile comfort, one she clung to after months of running, hiding, and surviving on little more than scraps and desperation. Her clothes were tattered, her boots cracked, and her hair, once soft and flowing, was tangled into knots. She had grown used to the constant sting of hunger and the ache of exhaustion, but what weighed heaviest was the shame that clung to her, an invisible shroud she could never quite peel away. Her arms wrapped tighter around her knees as she stared into the fire, trying to lose herself in its glow. Every pop of the burning wood sounded louder than it should, echoing in the silence of the cabin. It had been so long since she'd been in the presence of another person, so long since she had felt seen. The memory of hands reaching for her, of cruel laughter and endless pursuit, haunted her every breath. Freedom had been bought with fear, and though she had managed to escape, she carried the marks of it all over her soul. The cabin door creaked suddenly, groaning as it pushed against the storm outside. Clara's body stiffened instantly. Her breath caught in her throat, and panic surged like lightning through her chest. She wanted to run, but her legs refused to move. Instead, she froze, her wide eyes darting to the doorway as the shadow of a man filled its frame. For a single, terrifying heartbeat, she thought they had found her again. Then she saw him. James. The lantern light caught his features, the rugged lines of his face, the weariness in his eyes, the mud staining his boots. He was just as she remembered, strong, weathered, carrying with him the unshakable steadiness of a man who had endured his own storms. The breath she had been holding burst out in a trembling rush as her shoulders sagged with relief. "You found me," she whispered, her voice so faint she barely heard it herself. James stepped fully into the cabin, closing the door against the raging wind. His eyes found her instantly, softening at the sight of her curled by the fire. "I told you I would," he answered, and in his voice there was no hesitation, no doubt, only the certainty of a man who kept his word. As he crossed the room, Clara's shame rose like a tide she couldn't stop. The closer he came, the more painfully aware she became of her state, her dirty skin, her torn dress, the months of grime that no river, no stream, no bath had been able to touch because she hadn't had the chance. Her throat tightened as her gaze dropped to the floor. How could he look at her now? How could he want to? When he knelt beside her, the warmth of his presence surrounded her, pulling her out of her spiral of fear. His face hovered close, his eyes searching hers, and she knew she could not hide. The words slipped out of her before she could stop them, fragile and trembling. "I haven't bathed in months," she confessed, shame dripping from every syllable. The silence that followed was unbearable. She wanted to crawl into herself, to disappear before the disgust could surface on his face. She turned her head, unable to bear the thought of seeing disappointment in his eyes. But then she heard it, a low, gentle laugh. Not mocking, not cruel, warm, real. Clara's breath stilled as James reached out, his rough hand brushing her chin, tilting her face back toward him. His thumb stroked across her cheek, dirt and all, as though it meant nothing to him. His smile, tender and steady, met her with a force she hadn't expected, unraveling the shame that had been strangling her heart. And before she could question it, before she could retreat behind her fear again, he leaned forward and kissed her. It was not the kind of kiss one gives out of pity or obligation. It was hungry, desperate, full of fire. His lips crashed against hers, devouring the months of loneliness, silencing the doubts that had clawed at her. Clara's heart pounded as the world outside dissolved. The storm, the fear, the dirt, none of it mattered. Her hands gripped his shirt as if holding onto him was the only way to anchor herself to this moment. For the first time in what felt like forever, she was not a fugitive, not broken, not unworthy. She was wanted. She was alive. And in James's arms, kissing him back with everything she had left, she finally believed she could be whole again. The fire had burned low, leaving only glowing embers that pulsed faintly in the hearth, like a heartbeat echoing in the dark. The storm outside had not eased, the rain still hammered the roof in wild fury, and the wind howled against the cabin walls as though determined to break inside. But within those four rough-hewn walls, Clara felt a stillness she had not known in months. She lay curled against James, her head resting on his chest, listening to the steady rise and fall of his breathing. The rhythm of it was more comforting than the fire's warmth, more secure than the walls around her. For the first time since she could remember, she allowed herself to breathe without fear of who might be waiting in the shadows. His arm was wrapped tightly around her, holding her close as though letting her go was unthinkable. His other hand idly traced along her back, not caring about the grime or the roughness of her worn dress. Every movement of his fingers carried a tenderness that left her heart aching. Clara stared at the flicker of light playing across the rafters and found herself whispering the question that had haunted her since the moment he kissed her. "Why would you kiss me like that?" Her voice was hesitant, fragile, as though the wrong answer might shatter the fragile hope blooming inside her. She kept her eyes down, her fingers twisting nervously in the fabric of his shirt. James's chest rumbled with a soft chuckle, and he pressed his lips gently to the crown of her tangled hair. "Because I love you, Clara. Do you really think a little dirt could ever change that?" The words struck her with more force than the storm outside. Her throat tightened, and her breath caught as tears welled in her eyes. She had imagined every possible response, prepared herself for rejection, but never for this. "Love." He said it as though it was the simplest truth in the world, as though it was as certain as the firelight or the beating of his heart beneath her cheek. "You don't understand," she whispered, the words trembling. "I was so sure no one could ever look at me again. Not like that. Not with hunger." Her shame threatened to spill out again, but James shifted, turning her so that she faced him fully. His hand cupped her cheek, rough and warm, and his gaze caught hers with unflinching intensity. "Clara," he said, his voice low, steady, like a vow carved into stone. "I don't want the polished version of you. I don't want the woman you think the world expects. I want you. Every scar, every tear, every part of you that you thought was too broken. That's the woman I fell in love with." The tears slipped free, rolling down her cheeks as her lips quivered. She tried to speak, but no words would come. All she could do was let the truth of his words seep into the deepest wounds of her heart, filling the hollow places she had carried for so long. His thumb brushed away the wetness on her face, but his smile never faltered. He looked at her as though she were the most precious thing he had ever held. When he kissed her again, it was different from before. It was slower, deeper, carrying a weight far greater than desire. This kiss was a promise, a seal upon the words he had spoken, a declaration that she was safe in his arms, that she was more than the grime, more than the fear, more than the months of struggle. It was a kiss that spoke of tomorrow, and the day after, and every day they would face together. Clara melted into it, her body trembling as the last of her defenses crumbled. The chains of shame and doubt that had bound her so tightly fell away, one by one, until she felt light enough to float. She clung to him, not from fear of being lost, but from the overwhelming need to stay where love had finally found her. The storm outside raged on, uncaring, but inside the cabin it no longer mattered. The wind could howl, the rain could fall, but Clara no longer feared the darkness pressing at the walls. She had endured it, survived it, and now, against all odds, she had found him. James pulled her close once more, his forehead resting against hers as he whispered, "You're mine, Clara. And I'm never letting go." Her tears turned into a soft, broken laugh as she nodded, her heart overflowing with a hope she had thought lost forever. She believed him. She believed in him. And as she curled against him once more, her body fitting perfectly into the shelter of his arms, she knew that whatever storms still waited beyond the cabin walls, she would no longer face them alone. For the first time in months, she felt free. And for the first time in her life, she felt home.